First off, anyone here last year see Rob King in my talk about SSH and SSHamble and stuff like that? Sweet, awesome, cool. So this is like a really quick recap of that, but with lots of new zero-day and fun. So really fast overview of all the SSH stuff, kind of talk about some of the major SSH weaknesses of the last 2 years that have been pretty wild. It's been the most exciting time in SSH in a very long time. Then some new research, new volumes, new exposure stats, and then some updates to open source tooling. So first off, if you look at the SSH protocol state diagram, there's a lot of stuff that's clear text, then a lot of stuff that's encrypted. All your authentication tends to happen after the kext's in it, and then after you authenticate, everything's multiplex channels. So just give an idea of how SSH works. A lot of folks don't realize how many different things leak out of SSH before you authenticate. So you get data from the TCP/IP stack, from the server version, the kext init extensions, the server banner, all the way to authentication and handshake. And so there's many different places where you can learn a lot about the server even before you authenticate. And so we're going to take advantage of that for some of our research here. If you look at SSH across the internet, it is actually the second most common admin protocol exposed to the internet, excluding HTTP. So there's more SSH out there than there is almost anything else, including remote desktop, SNMP, almost anything else. And these slides will be online pretty quickly, so we're going to go quick, but feel free to look at them later on. If you look at what makes up SSH, though, it's really just two vendors. It's OpenSSH and Dropper make up something like 98% of all possible installations of SSH. However, the long tail of things that are not SSH and Dropper are actually really important. Those tend to be things like your ICS devices, OT devices, things like that. So you have the custom Cisco SSH daemon, the LANware, the LANcom, all this stuff. So even though these kind of oddball SSH daemons are not particularly common, they're pretty important when you do find them. Things like MoveIt, et cetera, that expose all your secret data. So SSH itself provides both a transport and authentication. So it's almost like TLS in that sense. You got a little version exchange thingy. All right, might have to yell back at them soon at this rate. But so SSH is very much like TLS. Then you have an encrypted transport done through kext init, and then you actually do authentication. Then you do your actual thing. So when you look at SSH authentication overall, almost every server on the planet supports both pub key authentication and password authentication, and that's it. It's really rare to find a machine that doesn't support password authentication by default, because password authentication shows up as both password, but also shows up as what's called keyboard interactive, which just means interactive PAM, it ends up being just a password as well. So there's a long tail of weird stuff, but I want to talk about some really neat things you can do with SSH. My favorite thing probably is you can take someone else's public key and then throw it at a particular server and find out whether they can log into that server while only having their public key, not their private key. So that's really useful if, let's say, you want to find out who Giotan is by taking their pub key from GitHub and spraying the internet trying to log in as them, and then see whether you get half authentication or not. But there's other really useful things you can do with it. You can confirm that a username has access to something. You can see whether your own credential that you might have tried to rotate is still being used someplace. And you can always do it with just the private side of the key, which is fantastic. When you start getting into authentication itself, that's where you start getting the fun part. Once you authenticate, then you do all this other stuff. You can do interactive shells, of course, but also command execution that's blind. You can do file transfers, TCP/IP forwarding, things like that, VPN tunneling, et cetera. So when a SSH daemon punts authentication until after the protocol level authentication, let's say an SSH daemon just drops you to a login prompt, but after doing the SSH auth, you actually have a pretty wide attack surface. You now attack all these other things like these channels and other things like that because they're exposed in that post-auth, even though pre-auth technically scenario. So effectively, it's basically like TLS. It's a little bit different, but you can almost think of it as TLS. So I want to do a quick recap of some of the fun bugs. Terrapin was fun last year. They found a way to truncate the TCP session in a way that caused it to pick a less secure cipher, which let you do some neat crypto attacks. The XYUtils backdoor was probably one of the best backdoors in the history of the internet. The person involved, or person, spent about 3 years slowly gaining trust before they really twisted the knife and then dropped a backdoor. Unfortunately, got caught last second. We did this whole hunt for Giotan last year where we took their pub key and hunted the internet for them, and we found absolutely nothing, so they have fantastic OPSEC. Regression was one of the first RCEs and default OpenSSH in many, many years. So it was OpenBSD finally had to update their website again. But the great thing about that is this is really difficult to exploit on non-32-bit x86, but it's been shown to be exploitable. So weirdly enough, we're not seeing a lot of machines getting popped through it, but it's one of the first real severe exploits in a long time. Credit to the Qualys threat unit group. The MoveIt one is fantastic. This is probably one of my funniest, favorite SSH bugs because it's so funny. The MoveIt, which is a software package you only know about because it's used to ransomware everybody, they support SSH, and the SSH control, they source it from a company called IPworks. And when you authenticate with a public key to IPworks in this stack, it would look at that raw byte of the public key, like the DARE encoded actual key itself, and it would treat it like a file path to try to open it up. for no possible good reason. Like, there's no reason why you take a giant binary blob and treat it like a file path. But the Watchtower folks found out that if you have a UNC URL or the localhost, $C$, et cetera, you can basically make it auth to itself to its own log files and things like that and bypass auth. So it's a really funny bug. It just lets you know, like, there is some crazy stuff out there in SSH land where it doesn't matter whether you think SSH is boring, people do amazingly silly things with it. Another recent bug here was the qual threat unit again. They found a way to do a man-in-the-middle attack on the client by triggering an actual out-of-memory on the client itself. So effectively, you queue up the session and you start smashing ping packets into the client side of it, and the client doesn't actually remove them from the queue. You eventually trigger an out-of-memory error, which causes the handshake to fail in an interesting way that'll let you basically bypass key checks. So a neat way to like turn a DOS bug into a man-in-the-middle bug, which is kind of a neat attack. There's another neat bug in the Go SSH library where if you use the API and kind of naively, you would actually authenticate the wrong key. The attacker would send a whole bunch of keys, and you would actually trigger the callback for the right key. They would never finish authenticating with the key. Then you give them a totally different key, authenticate with that key, and they'd think you're the first key again. So a really neat way to like basically pop shells and things that implemented this API poorly. As far as no one ever talked about what was exploitable, but we did some spelunking, and the only one we could find that looked like it's definitely exploitable was the NetApp Telegraph agent. Everything else looked like it was really difficult to actually abuse. And because it's 2025 and we're still talking about Cisco, they shipped another backdoor cred in SSH. This one is really interesting because it was only in a really narrow set of versions of their particular appliance. And it's the case where if they had just used like deny user root in their default configuration, because they don't normally support the root user, it would have made it a non-issue. So we're still seeing vendors shipping default passwords, and we're still shipping default configurations of SSH in a way that they're exploitable as a result. So one of my favorite bugs in the last year or so is this Erlang OTP SSH remote code execution bug. Is anyone here played with it a bit? A couple folks? All right, this is interesting because you don't necessarily think about Erlang SSH team as being a very common attack service. And if you look at the entire internet, there's almost none of these things on the internet that represent themselves as being Erlang. They all actually have a different name on them instead. So what's interesting about this is you would connect to it, you would just send the command exec function even before you authenticate, and you just run it. And the neat thing about the Erlang one is it actually was Erlang code executions. You're actually evaluating Erlang code. So it's like straight up remote code execution without shellcode. You're just running whatever Erlang you want. What was interesting about this one in particular is that a lot of people didn't find it just because of how dumb it was, including us. So we released this tool last year called SSHamble. We'll talk a little bit about it today. But the idea is that it's a research tool for SSH implementations. You can quickly scan all kinds of stuff. You can basically just SSHamble/24 and pop random shells out of all your stuff. And it does a really good job of finding all kinds of dumb bugs and embedded stuff and weird SSH implementations without having to really think about it too much. You can use it to do post-authentication attacks. So if a vendor gives you a shell that's SSH but not really SSH, you can use this tool to try to do TCP/IP channel forwarding and all those other kind of fun side attacks on top of that channel. And you can do a lot of neat things with pre-authentication state transition attacks where you can jam sessions in, things like that. It can also do post-session attacks. So cases where you're getting a Git shell, we can then abuse the Git shell to upload a shared object to then pop a shell, et cetera. So it's a really neat library. It's all written in Go for basically getting shells out of a secure shell when you're not supposed to. So one of the things that we looked into is why did we miss the SSHamble bug with, so why did we miss the Erlang bug with SSHamble? Well, ends up when we were doing the SSH handshake, we would send the normal banner, the kex in it, the kex response, then we'd send the open channel or the exec, and then if we got a response back, we're hey, we got a shell, here we go. What's interesting about the Erlang one is it does not reply. So it won't reply to any of this at all. When it's in the wrong state, it just doesn't reply at all, but it still runs the code. So because we saw a timeout on our side, we just thought it wasn't exploitable. So we fixed that. Unfortunately, by fixing that, you have to actually, it's basically a blind RCE. You have no idea whether the RCE works or not. So the way that most vuln scanners check for this is they actually cause a DNS lookup to bounce off the internet server, or they do something else that's basically will ping back to you on the back end to let you know that something's happening there. So we try to figure out is this thing actually exploitable in the wild? Is it actually interesting? And there's almost there's 4 Erlang SHDs in the whole internet unshowed that are out there. So okay, no one cares about this. Then we realize that it's actually the base platform for something called Cisco ConfD, which is used in millions of Cisco routers instead. But it shows up on a different port, on port 830, and it has a different banner because it has the word ConfD in it, not Erlang. And so once you figure that out, then it's great, now we can actually go after all this stuff instead. What's annoying about it, though, is the way that Cisco deployed it is also not very exploitable. They've got a separate shell and a separate thing, and it's like really tough to do anything with. So it ended up being like the most boring bug ever. The only fun thing about this bug is if you find somebody else who actually has an exploitable version, you can patch it by setting your payload to be SSH:stop, and you can remotely stop their SSH server as the payload, and then you fix it for them. So if you want to write a patching tool, it's super easy. You just make it shut down Erlang as part of the RCE, and that's a nice verifiable way to make sure it's vulnerable is you turn it off by making it less vulnerable. So. Alrighty, so recapping some of the stuff we found last year. We found about 27 million devices in IPv4 that had port 22 open. About 14 million of those would negotiate national authentication session. And we had 110,000 random sessions, like shells. And so most of the work of this talk is like, how do we go through 100,000 shells and figure out which ones are interesting? It's mostly just like scrolling through shells by the millions and just trying to figure it out. So we found about 9 unique vulnerabilities, but this whole test last year was only limited to port 22. And we found like, there's some of the fun bugs we found last year. For Ruckus wireless APs, we found like a pre-authentication command injection bug. For Digi-transport, you can just straight up auth bypass. This one is really funny because it was only exploitable if you hadn't SSH into the machine since last reboot. So we're working with a vendor, and the vendor's like, we cannot reproduce this. Ends up because they're shelling in, setting it the debugging tool, then they'd run the exploit wouldn't work. But if they reboot it, the exploit would work. And it took like months to figure out that it was this stupid case. It was like a Heisenberg bug for them. It drove us all crazy. We also found fun bugs in Panasonic switches, Realtek, SoftServe, GOGS, all kinds of fun stuff. We also found the silliest bug ever in Windows, OpenSSH for Windows, where they took the most sensitive function in the entire OpenSSH code base and backdoored it by accident. So there's a timing safe binary comparison function that made carriage return line feed aware, which just breaks everything. It's no longer timing safe. It actually leaks memory now, things like that. One of the fun bugs that like didn't get fixed at all was actually the unlimited public key testing. So drop error is the number 2 most common SSH daemon out there. We reported to the drop error folks, hey guys, you can like test millions of pub keys per second against your server just by grinding away on them. Like you can take the whole GitHub 117 million user database, grind it against a drop error box, and tell you which of those keys work in that machine. And they just kind of shrugged. So you can still do that today with drop error. It's great. So 12 months later, like what's changed? What are the new bugs? What do we find? Funny enough, like if you look at the number of SSHs on the internet, it's actually back down to 2018 levels. We've actually like have less 22 open to the world than before. So it looked like there's a big spike of like new kind of tar pits and kind of fake anti-malware thingies, and they've actually most of them been shut down again. So weirdly enough, we're back to the exact same level of SSH on the internet as 2018. And this is the Shodan data. But we also ran our own v4 scans and compared them to see like how different they were, and they lined up pretty well. Another interesting take is the OpenSSH. Has anyone here used failed to ban before? Cool, great. Okay, yeah, so failed to ban is the thing that watches your log files, and then when it sees a bunch of failed auth attempts, it like basically black holes or bans the person. It's a really dumb thing. Like we do it because we have to, because there's nothing out there better. So OpenSSH finally added a built-in rate limiter into OpenSSH itself. And it's great because it'll prevent a lot of these like attacks that require multiple attempts and so on. It actually like kills most useful exploits for SSH. Unfortunately, no one uses the damn thing. It's only 9.8 and newer, so no one's actually using the new version of OpenSSH. So if you look at the number of devices that are unpatched, or sorry, that don't support this internet, it's all of them. Like it's basically made no impact to the exposure of the world because no one's adopted the newer version of OpenSSH. So it'll get fixed eventually, but right now almost nobody's using it. It's like 500K or less out of the 14 odd million are even running a version that supports this rate limiting by default. So another useful thing is we thought, okay, let's look at like not just port 22, but every port that Shodan has ever found SSH on, and let's scan all of those across all IPv4, and then compare that with the Shodan results and see like what's different, right? Like Shodan typically will do a roll-up, so they'll say for a given scan, we've seen everything the last 30 days, we'll give you stats. You're not really searching a single day of data with Shodan, you're searching like a 30-day roll-up. We did a single flash snapshot, like the whole internet in like a 1 hour period, bang, on a really big server, just snapshot everything real quick, go. So you'll see some differences here, like in port 9022, for example, there's only a tiny little bit of Shodan, a whole lot of our Shamble stuff. Other cases, it's opposite, where Shodan found a whole lot of stuff, we found very little, and that's because those devices were changing IPs a lot, so they're getting double counted over a 30-day period. But generally, you can trust Shodan. Like we did a unfiltered, no exclusions. We just scanned everybody whether they liked it or not, and the results lined up really well with Shodan. So if you're ever worried, like, oh, is Shodan hiding a bunch of results not correct? It's actually pretty accurate, and our research really shows that it's dependable. So starting over from like, okay, what did 2025 look like versus 2024 from a scan from a couple days ago? We found more SSH servers, about 23 million, down from 27 million with a port open, but still about 14 million that have SSH authentication, still about 107,000 sessions, so about 110,000. So effectively, there's no real change. Like in terms of actual exposed SSH daemons, there wasn't really a big impact between last year and this year. So we went ahead and say, let's go scan other 110 top SSH ports. That added another 2.3 million daemons and another 20,000 more more shells, and we found a lot more bugs. So yay, more 0-day. So what was really sad, though, is we went back and looked at all the machines that we found last year. So all the Digi routers, all the machines we found new fun bugs on, and we had a big list of them, right? Some of these even spit out the serial number of the device, you know exactly who they are, what they were, et cetera. And in case like Digi, we even told Digi, the company, here's a list of all the serial numbers of affected devices. Please tell your users to patch it. Nobody patched anything. It's actually worse than it was last year. So we've actually found more vulnerabilities in the stuff we released and patched in advisory last year than we did this year. Like it's this year than last year. So no one cares. So you can do all the research you want. You can tell the world, but no one's going to patch your stuff. So whatever, have fun, hack things. What was interesting, though, is we started digging into like the other odd ports, and we started finding all kinds of other interesting stuff. So of those 130,000 shells we found, about 50,000 are like real things. Some of those are definitely honeypots. We've got a really good honeypot fingerprinter. Like, for example, if you connect to an OpenSSH port and it gives you the banner, and that's it, it's probably OpenSSH. It gives you the banner and then also spews the kex init string, it's probably honeypot. So that's a super easy way to find like all the Paramuco-based honeypots. They just do the handshake slightly differently, and it's easy to check. Sonic walls will authenticate you in, and then you can basically do authentication on top of that. And then about 14,000 new bugs are these carrier Ethernet switches that are all across Asia. Basically, they run like most of Thailand. And these things are just straight pop shell done. It's great. So I'll go into some details. So hopefully this isn't too flashy, but this is just what it looks like when you're scrolling through 130,000 sessions trying to find new 0-day. It's just a lot of grepping until you find new fun stuff. So the new bugs. First one I mentioned, these are all pending disclosure because we only found them a couple days ago. But this one is fun because it's not just the port 10, it's port 1022 is an actual real SSH shell. But then if you scan port 830, similar to Cisco, it's a netconfd yang thing where it's a big XML blob and you can like reconfigure the router by sending an XML back to it, things like that. So funny enough, this auth bypass works in both. You're able to basically send your SSH auth method to be a single null byte, and it just logs you with no creds, which is great. The other fun one you found was this post SSH failed login. So this is PBX. It's a kind of an older PBX. And when you first connect to it, it bypasses auth, drops you to like a username password login. Once you fail the username and password 3 times in a row, it drops you to a shell. It's great. So all you got to do is like fail to log in 3 times, and then you get a free shell, and then from there you're done. It's like it's the dumbest thing ever. Another fun one we found last year is that you connect to an SSH port, and then you see like escape key is blah, and you're like, wait, did you just telnet from my SSH? Yes, and you can do like the control bang, like a control escape bracket to open up the telnet prompt, and then tell it just do whatever. So there's lots of fun like kind of mini subshell escapes like that. And the last one we found, though, is like absolutely hilarious. There's a Chinese ISP that requires you to run their own sneaky little SSH daemon on a high port, and it's contractually required. There are Bastion host services in their EULA saying, we will not support you in your cloud servers unless you run our special daemon. Well, this special daemon, of course, has an auth bypass and it's Paramuco. So you give it any public key, and it drops into a shell as user none, uppercase N, because it's Python. And then you basically have a little mini BMC prompt, reboot the machine, reimage it, whatever, things like that, get the serial console. So it's really funny that the ISP in this case contractually obligated a backdoor that was trivial to exploit. So when you do internet scans, something I want to bring out there is there's always a way to get bonus vulnerabilities, and I recommend you do this. If you're ever going to scan the internet, the very first thing you should ever do is run responder on the same machine. So get an internet box, set up responder, just run it right now, set up TSpeed up in the background too while you're at it. There's also a tool called Flamingo that I wrote with Tom Steele at Atreides Partners. That's a lot of fun. That actually covers a few other protocols. We're in the middle of porting over SMB to Flamingo, so it'll do all of responder soon, and it'll just be one nice Go binary. So we'll have that done soon. But basically, you run both these daemons at once, and then whenever you start triggering scans and attacks, random machines on the internet start throwing in the password to you. So going back to 2014, I did an internet-wide scan of SSH, and I collected 5,000 domain admin credentials by all of Palo Alto's customers, because Palo Alto machines had a thing called user ID, and they were configured to then connect into the attacking machine to find out which user was logged in. But they didn't know that they weren't supposed to do that on the internet too. So you could attack them from the internet and then collect their domain admin credential through NTLM, and you're done. You just own the machine because the Palo Alto gave you the domain admin cred. So if I did this entire internet, one of the big African national airlines still has the Palo ID user ID set up this way, and we still got their domain admin cred. What's interesting, though, is we actually got another new bug. So WatchGuard firewalls decided that they wanted to be cool like Palo Alto too, and they started throwing their passwords at all of you as well. So there's some random 0-day in WatchGuard. I don't even know how the hell it's set up, but we started just getting thousands of random WatchGuard domain admin creds flying into our scanning machine just because they decided to connect back when they got an alert from a port scanner. So free 0-day. I don't know what useful it is, but it's a good reminder. Always run tspeedup, always run responder when you're doing scans because you get bonus 0-day. So about to run out of time here, but Shamble got some new features, lots of new stuff. You can skip known versions. You can say, I don't want to do weird stuff in OpenSSH. I just want to only focus on the weird stuff. You can give it some regexes, some new auth bypass stuff. We added the Hano Box bad keys database, which lists all the known leaked keys. He also did an amazing work of dumping the Fortinet major leak and pulling all the Fortinet appliance keys out of it and adding that to the blockchain lookup thing. So you can basically use it to find out are any of the SSH keys in your environment already compromised? And now Shamble will tell you too as part of it. Whole bunch of built-in checks. Lots of kind of usage information here for running it. You can do almost anything with it. Like, is a stale SSH key still being used? Is this default password still work anywhere? It's kind of like a everything utility Swiss Army knife for doing SSH testing. And then lastly, you get an interactive shell, so you can do Control-E and make TCP/IP forwarding, do some port scanning, things like that, all from the shell, as opposed to having to create your own SSH client. And if you don't like our tool at all, that's cool. We're actually in the middle of porting Shamble into Nuclei itself. So if you use a Nuclei scanner, we're hopefully going to have all the same Shamble checks available as Nuclei templates soon and share the same code base. You can just run Nuclei like normal and get all these fun bugs dropping out on the Nuclei side. So that is the talk. Thank you so much.